In this lesson, we'll take a look at creating a colored pencil drawing of a piece of candy. Hello everyone, Matt here with thevirtualinstructor.com, and in this lesson we're going to take a look at creating a colored pencil and marker drawing of a piece of candy. We'll use the marker applications as somewhat of an underpainting, establishing some of the values and some of the colors initially, and then we'll develop the details with our colored pencil applications and make the color much richer and also increase the contrast. Let's go ahead and take a look at the materials and get started with this one. For this lesson, we're going to use very simple materials. We're going to be using toned gray paper. This is a look at the pad that I'll be using here. The toned gray paper allows us to push the values relatively easily, and it also provides some added contrast with the colors. We'll be using prismacolor markers to lay down the initial applications, creating somewhat of an underpainting for our final drawing, which will be created using colored pencils. And for this demonstration, I'll be using Prismacolor Premier colored pencils. We'll begin with a light contour line sketch using an H graphite pencil, but before we apply markers or colored pencils, we'll gently lift the graphite using a kneaded eraser. Then we'll start with our initial marker applications, beginning with a 20% warm gray marker. This color is applied in the areas of darkest value initially. Now you'll notice when you're applying the marker to the surface that initially it seems very dark, but as it dries, the value starts to become a little bit lighter. This is because the surface is saturated, and as it dries, the pigmentation is left behind. We'll address all of the darkest values in the wrinkles of the wrapper, and we'll also pay special attention to the location of the light source. In this case, our light source is originating from the upper left-hand corner. This means most of our darker shadows will exist on the right side of our subject. We can go back over the top of the applications and make the values slightly darker with another application. We'll also address the area of cast shadow underneath the sucker and right behind it. Now, of course, many of our darkest values are much darker than the 20% warm gray can accomplish, so we'll revisit some of these areas using a 50% warm gray, again to make the values slightly darker. We're going to push the values and the contrast much further when we get to the colored pencil applications, but for right now we're laying a nice groundwork with the markers. Now, with our grays in place, we'll go ahead and start adding a bit of color. We'll start here by addressing the red areas on the wrapper of the sucker. These red locations are addressed using a poppy red Prismacolor marker. We'll address the lettering on the wrapper and of course all of the designs. We can go right over the top of our warm gray applications since these underlayments will affect the value of the red that's perceived. Once we have our red applications in place, or at least our initial red applications in place, we can start addressing some of the green locations on the wrapper. We'll start by addressing the lighter green applications, and for this we'll use a chartreuse marker. Here again we can go right over the top of the underpainting that we created with the warm gray applications. The locations of darker green are addressed using an apple green marker. You can see that this green is slightly different from our chartreuse. This is important because the wrapper itself features two slightly different greens. This green is much cooler than the yellow green that we used before. Here again we'll address all of the areas of the wrapper that have this darker green, including some of the lettering and of course the design on the packaging. Speaking of lettering, we'll go ahead and address some of the lettering that happens on the front side of the wrapper. Now here we'll put some indications of letters, but because this area is so small, it's okay if the letters that we create here are not entirely legible. Before we address the green part of the wrapper, the large green part of the wrapper, we'll go ahead and fill in some of the lettering using a white colored pencil. Of course, there isn't a white marker, so these areas are addressed with a colored pencil. Then we can go back with our apple green marker and fill in the spaces in between the lettering. We'll carefully work around the red lettering, taking note that there is a dark border around each of these letters, which we'll address with colored pencil applications. Then we can go back and refine the white lettering, again using the white colored pencil. Now we'll go ahead and fill in the rest of the darker green areas on the wrapper, including some text that's wrapped up at the bottom portion of the wrapper. Using a white colored pencil, we'll start applying some of the white areas on the wrapper and of course the stick. As we do so, we're cognizant of the direction of the light. The light source, of course, is originating in the upper left-hand corner, as I mentioned before. This means most of our strongest light areas are going to exist on the left side of the body of the sucker. This doesn't mean, however, that we're not still going to find some strong areas of highlight in the areas of shadow. We'll address these with a sharpened white pencil. We'll continue working to the bottom portion of the wrapper. Again, most of the front side of the bottom portion is getting a lot of the light coming from the left side. This means that these areas are going to be fairly light in value, and we can put quite a bit of pressure on the white colored pencil. We're careful to maintain the areas of shadow in between each of the wrinkles, however. We will apply a light application in the area of strongest shadow on the back side of the bottom portion of the wrapper. And since some light does reflect off of the surface back onto the surface of the wrapper, we will apply a bit of white in the area of reflected highlight. Now we'll go back with a green colored pencil. This time we'll be using the olive green pencil to go back and intensify some of the areas of the darkest green. We'll allow some of the marker applications to show through to provide a bit of variety in this color. You can see that this color is quite a bit darker in value than our marker applications, so we can also use it to indicate some shadow. As this green is applied, the contrast in color and value starts to become a bit stronger, which this is what we want to accomplish with the colored pencil applications. Of course, there are a few areas of strong shadow in the bottom portion of the wrapper. We want to make sure that these areas are intensified with our green pencil. We'll make sure to preserve areas of highlight, however, because this pencil is so much darker than the marker color that we used previously. Now we can move on to intensifying our light green applications. For this, we'll use a chartreuse pencil over the top of the chartreuse marker applications. These applications are quite a bit lighter in value than our marker applications, so therefore we want to intensify the areas of highlight, especially on this lower portion of the wrapper. We'll allow some of the marker applications to show through to indicate some of the darker values in these locations. Then we'll move on to doing the same thing with our red areas. For this, we'll use crimson red. In this case, the crimson red is darker in value than our red marker applications, so we'll use it primarily in the areas of shadow. Now we'll address those dark areas around the red lettering. We want to create a more natural looking black in this location, so we'll start with an application of indigo blue. Over the top, we'll apply burnt umber. This combination of a dark blue and a dark brown will lead to a more natural looking black. We'll also address the darkest areas that happen in the wrinkles using our burnt umber. For most of the areas on the body of the sucker, we want to make sure that our shadows remain warm. We'll contrast this with a cooler cast shadow later in the process. Now we'll address some of the middle values that happen in the drawing. We'll start with the stick of the sucker with an application of 20% warm gray, and we'll continue with this pencil onto the body of the wrapper. Then we'll go back with a 50% warm gray pencil and make some of these shadowed areas a little bit stronger. As we do so, we start to see the form of the sucker start to take shape. We'll also address some of the areas of darkest shadow on the bottom portion of the wrapper. And as we begin to increase the contrast, the details of the drawing start to make more sense. Now we can go back and increase the contrast even further by addressing additional highlights and lighter values using the white colored pencil. We'll add a few more highlights, especially on the bottom end of the wrapper. These strong highlights are easily added directly over the top of the colored pencil applications we already have in place. Now we'll go back with our 50% warm gray and make the shadow underneath the stick of the sucker a little bit darker. We'll also continue the process of increasing the contrast, this time with a bit of our dark umber, in the areas of darkest shadow. By doing this, not only do we make the shadows appear darker, but we also make the highlights appear lighter, purely because of contrast. We can also add a few subtle transitions of value in this area as well, using the dark umber. Although outlining is not encouraged, we can further refine the edge of the bottom portion of the sucker using the dark umber as well. And we can also intensify some of the shadows on the bottom portion of the sucker using the dark umber. Now we'll go back and intensify some of the greens a bit further. We'll return with our olive green pencil and work around some of the lettering. We're careful to preserve the areas of highlight that we've already added with the white pencil. Now we need to address the cast shadow underneath the sucker. Notice how light it's become. We'll go back with a 50% warm gray and re-establish another shape. We can go back again with our 20% warm gray and intensify the shadow just a slight bit further as it extends out beyond the secondary shape. While this area dries, we'll go back with our 20% warm gray and touch up a few areas. Mainly here, we're just muting some of the colors to create a more natural appearance. Then, before addressing the shadow any further, we'll use a kneaded eraser to erase any graphite lines that remain. Now we're ready to add a bit of coolness to our cast shadow. For this, we'll use a jade green marker. If you'll remember, we used dark umber for most of our darkest shadows on the sucker. By using a cooler color in our area of cast shadow, this will increase the contrast through color temperature between our subject and the cast shadow. Here again, this color appears dark when it's applied, but as it dries, it becomes quite a bit lighter. We'll return to the cast shadow in a moment, but for now, let's go back and intensify some of the areas of light yellow-green. For this, we'll go back with an application of apple green in areas. Now we'll apply the dark umber to the areas of shadow on top of the red lettering. And now we're ready to address the cast shadow even further. We'll start with an application of dark umber. We'll apply the dark umber only in the areas of darkest shadow. This means directly underneath the body of the sucker and then up along underneath the stick of the sucker. Now to make the shadow much darker and again retain its coolness, we'll go back over the top with an application of indigo blue. To smooth out these applications and remove some of the grain that's left by the paper, we'll apply a colorless blender over the top, mixing these two colors together. Now we'll pull some of the indigo blue into some of the areas of darkest shadow on the body of the sucker and the wrapper. Again, this just leads to a more natural looking black and a more natural looking shadow. And now, our colored pencil and marker drawing of a piece of candy is complete. If you enjoyed this video, then I know that you'll enjoy being a member at thevirtualinstructor.com. Our comprehensive membership program includes video courses on drawing and painting, weekly live lessons, ebooks, lesson plans for teachers, weekly critiques, and much, much more. To learn more about our program, just visit thevirtualinstructor.com/members or click on the card in the upper right-hand corner. And if you want to check out 3 of our course modules for free, you can do so. Just click on the link on your screen now. And if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure that you subscribe to the channel. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.